The period known as medieval Britain begins in 1066 with the Norman Conquest and extends to 1485, culminating in the victory of Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field. This era, spanning over 4 centuries, represents a transformation in the political, social, and legal structures of England. It is defined by the consolidation of feudal authority, the establishment and evolution of the monarchy, the development of common law and parliamentary institutions, and the recurrent interplay of monarchy, nobility, and church authority. The Norman Conquest itself marks the decisive end of Anglo-Saxon rule and introduces a framework of governance, land tenure, and military organization that would shape the trajectory of England through the High and Late Middle Ages. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, asserted a claim to the English throne, contending that the previous king, Edward the Confessor, had promised him succession. The death of Edward without a direct heir precipitated a succession crisis. Harold Godwin's son, a member of the Anglo-Saxon elite and the most powerful noble in England, was elected king by the Witenagemot, the Council of Nobles, and crowned at Westminster. William responded by assembling a force of Norman, Breton, and Flemish soldiers and sailing across the English Channel, landing in Sussex in September of that year. The two armies met at the Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066, a confrontation that ended in the death of Harold and a decisive victory for William. The outcome of the battle initiated the replacement of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy with a Norman ruling class, the redistribution of land holdings, and the establishment of Norman influence over English governance and society. Following his victory, William took immediate steps to consolidate power. He systematically distributed large tracts of land to his loyal followers, creating a network of barons whose authority was directly dependent on royal favor. This redistribution effectively dismantled the Anglo-Saxon landholding system and established the basis for a hierarchical feudal structure in which all land ultimately owed service and allegiance to the crown. Castles were constructed across England as both military fortifications and administrative centers, projecting Norman authority into previously resistant regions. One of the earliest measures of control was the brutal campaign known as the Harrying of the North, 1069 to 1070, in which northern English territories were subjected to widespread devastation in response to local rebellions and Danish incursions. Contemporary estimates indicate that thousands perished as a result of famine and violence, though the precise demographic impact is debated. The campaign, however, served its strategic purpose of ensuring the submission of northern England to Norman rule. In addition to military and political measures, William sought to formalize knowledge of his new kingdom through the commissioning of the Domesday Book in 1086. This extensive survey recorded land ownership, the value of estates, resources, and obligations owed to the crown. It was unprecedented in its scope, enabling the administration of taxation, assessment of military obligations, and enforcement of feudal rights. The Domesday Survey reflects both the ambition of William's central authority and the early bureaucratic structures that would become characteristic of English governance during the medieval period. The reigns of William's successors continued the process of consolidating royal authority and refining administrative structures. William II, known as William Rufus, reigned from 1087 to 1100. His tenure was marked by efforts to extend control over the English church and assert authority over the barons. Though he faced challenges due to regional rebellions, and ecclesiastical resistance. Upon William II's death during a hunting expedition in the New Forest, his brother Henry I ascended to the throne. Henry I, 1100 to 1135, undertook significant administrative reforms, including the issuance of the Charter of Liberties upon his coronation. This charter attempted to regulate abuses by royal officials and curtail the arbitrary exercise of royal power, particularly concerning the treatment of barons and tenants-in-chief. It is widely considered a precursor to later constitutional developments, including Magna Carta. Henry I also implemented a more organized system of justice, appointing royal judges and itinerant justices to oversee the enforcement of law throughout the kingdom. These measures contributed to the development of a centralized legal system, enhancing the authority of the crown over regional magnates and creating mechanisms for consistent adjudication. Additionally, Henry's reign saw increased regulation of the economy, including control over coinage and market practices, reflecting a broader concern with fiscal management and the consolidation of royal resources. The death of Henry I without a surviving male heir in 1135 precipitated a period of political instability known as the Anarchy. Henry's designated successor, his daughter Matilda, faced opposition from Stephen of Blois, a grandson of William I. Stephen quickly seized the throne, resulting in a civil war that lasted nearly 2 decades. During this period, royal authority weakened significantly in some regions, and many local lords acted autonomously, consolidating power within their own territories. Castles proliferated as strongholds for independent baronial power, and the general population experienced both disruption and instability. The conflict concluded with the Treaty of Wallingford in 1153, which recognized Matilda's son, Henry, as Stephen's successor, thereby restoring dynastic continuity and paving the way for the establishment of the Angevin dynasty under Henry II. Henry II ascended to the throne in 1154, initiating a period of significant administrative, legal, and territorial consolidation. He inherited not only the English crown but extensive continental territories, including Normandy, Anjou, and Aquitaine, collectively referred to as the Angevin Empire. Henry's governance emphasized the strengthening of royal prerogatives, particularly through reforms in the judicial system. The creation of common law involved the standardization of legal procedures and the establishment of royal courts with jurisdiction over criminal and civil matters. Assizes such as Clarendon, 1166, and Northampton, 1176, introduced a system for investigating crime and ensuring the presence of juries, laying the foundation for trial by jury as a central component of English law. During Henry II's reign, tensions with the church became prominent, culminating in a confrontation with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Disputes over the jurisdiction of secular and ecclesiastical courts, as well as the rights of clergy, ultimately led to Becket's assassination in 1170 by followers of Henry II. The event had long-lasting implications for the relationship between monarchy and church, reinforcing the influence of ecclesiastical authority while also highlighting the limitations of royal power. Following Henry II, his sons Richard I and John faced significant challenges that undermined the stability of the monarchy. Richard I, known primarily for his participation in the Third Crusade, spent minimal time in England, delegating domestic governance and raising substantial funds through taxation and loans to support military campaigns abroad. His absence emphasized the reliance of the crown on baronial loyalty and administrative intermediaries. John's reign, 1199 to 1216, saw the loss of substantial continental territories, including Normandy, to the French crown and the imposition of heavy taxation on the English populace. These pressures provoked baronial unrest, resulting in the drafting and sealing of Magna Carta in 1215. This document codified limits on the king's authority, established principles of due process, and represented a pivotal moment in the evolution of constitutional governance in England. The decades following the sealing of Magna Carta saw further development in governance, including the establishment of mechanisms for consultation with nobles and the gradual emergence of parliamentary structures. Monarchs such as Henry III, 1216 to 1272, and Edward I, 1272 to 1307, reinforced royal authority while navigating challenges from baronial factions, military campaigns, and the administrative complexities of a kingdom spanning multiple regions and populations. Edward I, in particular, is noted for his conquests in Wales and campaigns in Scotland, as well as for summoning the Model Parliament in 1295, which included representatives of towns and shires in addition to the nobility. This development marked a significant step toward representative governance, balancing royal prerogatives with broader political consultation. Throughout this period, England's society, economy, and institutions underwent gradual but profound changes. The feudal system structured obligations between lords, vassals, and the crown, while the church maintained influence over both spiritual and temporal affairs. Population growth, urban development, and the expansion of trade contributed to economic transformation, creating a more interconnected and administratively complex kingdom. Legal, military, and fiscal reforms initiated under successive monarchs laid the groundwork for England's institutional resilience and capacity to manage internal and external challenges. By the early 15th century, England had developed a political and legal framework that enabled successive monarchs to assert authority while contending with both internal factions and external conflicts. The Hundred Years' War with France, intermittent dynastic crises, and social upheavals such as the Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt further shaped the trajectory of medieval governance, law, and society. These developments illustrate the interplay of monarchy, nobility, and commoners, as well as the evolving balance of power between crown and parliament, which defined medieval England's institutional identity. The period concluded with the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1485, a series of dynastic conflicts between the houses of Lancaster and York, which ultimately ended with the victory of Henry Tudor at Bosworth Field in 1485. This transition marks the conclusion of the medieval era in Britain and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty, which would oversee further centralization of power, consolidation of legal and administrative structures, and the transition into the early modern state. The preceding centuries, however, established the framework of governance, law, and social hierarchy that would underpin these later developments. The Norman Conquest of England in 1066 initiated one of the most significant transformations in the island's political, social, and legal structures. The conquest itself was the result of a succession crisis following the death of Edward the Confessor in January 1066. Edward died without a direct heir, creating competing claims to the throne. Harold Godwin's son, Earl of Wessex and a dominant figure within the Anglo-Saxon nobility, was elected king by the Witenagemot, the council of leading nobles and ecclesiastical figures, and was crowned on January 6, 1066. Simultaneously, William, Duke of Normandy, claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, and that Harold had sworn an oath of support during a visit to Normandy in 1064. William assembled an invasion force composed of Norman, Breton, and Flemish contingents, estimated at 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers, including heavily armed cavalry and archers, along with a transport fleet capable of crossing the English Channel. The armies met at the Battle of Hastings on October 14, 1066. Harold's forces, approximately 6,000 men, were largely composed of infantry arranged in shield wall formations, while William's forces utilized a combination of cavalry, infantry, and archers. After a full day of fighting, Harold was killed, traditionally reported as being struck in the eye by an arrow, and the Anglo-Saxon army was defeated. William secured the submission of English territories through a combination of military force and strategic alliances. His coronation as King of England occurred on December 25, 1066, at Westminster Abbey, marking the formal start of Norman rule. Immediately following his coronation, William implemented measures to consolidate control over England. Land redistribution was a primary tool for ensuring loyalty among the Norman elite. Large estates formerly held by Anglo-Saxon nobles were confiscated and granted to Norman barons and knights, establishing a feudal system in which all land ultimately owed service to the king. This restructuring created a hierarchical society in which loyalty, military service, and taxation were codified through tenure. The new barons owed military support directly to the crown, ensuring that the monarch retained authority over both the nobility and the broader population. Military and administrative control was further reinforced through the construction of castles across England. These fortifications served both defensive and administrative purposes. Motte and Bailey designs, rapidly constructed with earthworks and timber, allowed Norman lords to secure key locations and project authority into previously resistant regions. Stone castles gradually replaced timber structures, reflecting both advances in military architecture and the increasing permanence of Norman governance. Key early examples include the Tower of London, begun in 1078, and numerous castles across the Midlands and the north. These fortifications were strategically placed to secure transport routes, protect settlements, and act as centers for royal administration and taxation collection. In the north, resistance to Norman rule required particularly harsh measures. In 1069 and 1070, the harrying of the north was conducted in response to uprisings and the threat of Danish support for Anglo-Saxon rebels. Norman forces systematically destroyed villages, crops, and livestock, resulting in widespread famine and significant depopulation. Contemporary estimates suggest that tens of thousands perished or were displaced. While the campaign devastated the northern economy and population, it effectively secured Norman dominance in a historically rebellious region and demonstrated the lengths to which William would go to maintain authority. Alongside military and territorial consolidation, William sought to formalize knowledge of his kingdom's resources to enable systematic taxation and administration. The Domesday Book, compiled in 1086 under William's orders, represents one of the most comprehensive surveys of land, wealth, and obligations in medieval Europe. It recorded estates, livestock, tenants, and fiscal responsibilities, providing the crown with a detailed map of resources across England. The survey not only facilitated efficient taxation, but also allowed the enforcement of feudal rights and the resolution of disputes over land ownership. The Domesday Book included detailed accounts for over 13,000 settlements in England, demonstrating the scale of administrative organization under William's rule. William's successors continued to strengthen royal authority and the administrative structures of the kingdom. William II, known as Rufus, reigned from 1087 to 1100. His rule was characterized by continued consolidation of power over both the nobility and the church, though he faced recurring challenges from regional revolts, particularly in the north and west. William II relied on a network of loyal barons and royal officials to enforce taxation and maintain order. His reign also saw ongoing disputes with the church over the appointment of bishops and the autonomy of ecclesiastical courts, foreshadowing future tensions between crown and clergy. Upon William II's death during a hunting expedition in the New Forest in 1100, his younger brother Henry I assumed the throne. Henry's reign, lasting until 1135, was marked by substantial administrative and legal reforms. One of his earliest acts as king was the issuance of the Charter of Liberties, which sought to curb abuses by royal officials and establish limitations on arbitrary taxation and imprisonment. The charter addressed concerns raised by barons over excessive fiscal demands and encroachments on feudal rights, establishing principles that would later influence Magna Carta and subsequent constitutional developments. Henry I further strengthened the judicial and bureaucratic apparatus of the monarchy. He expanded the system of itinerant justices, officials who traveled the kingdom to oversee royal courts and ensure uniform enforcement of the law. These reforms facilitated a centralized legal system capable of extending royal authority into regions that had traditionally been dominated by local magnates. Henry's administration also included careful oversight of coinage, markets, and trade, reflecting the increasing integration of economic and political control. The use of royal writs and charters to codify obligations and privileges enhanced the predictability and legitimacy of governance, contributing to the development of England's administrative identity during the early medieval period. Henry I's efforts to ensure dynastic continuity were disrupted by the death of his only legitimate son, William Adelin, in the White Ship disaster of 1120. The resulting succession crisis led to the contested accession of Stephen of Blois in 1135, bypassing Henry's daughter, Matilda, despite prior arrangements recognizing her as heir. This triggered a prolonged civil war, known as the Anarchy, which lasted from 1135 to 1154. During this period, barons exercised increased autonomy, fortifying castles and asserting local authority in the absence of strong centralized control. Warfare and political instability disrupted agricultural production, trade, and legal administration, creating a fragmented political landscape. The anarchy concluded with the Treaty of Wallingford in 1153, which established a compromise in which Stephen would remain king until his death, after which Matilda's son, Henry, would inherit the throne. This arrangement restored dynastic continuity and laid the foundation for the Angevin dynasty under Henry II, who assumed the throne in 1154. Henry II's succession marked a return to centralized authority and initiated a series of reforms that would significantly reshape English governance, law, and relations with the church. Henry II's inheritance included not only the English crown but extensive continental possessions, forming the Angevin Empire. His territories included Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Brittany, and Aquitaine, giving him control over lands stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees. The governance of these territories required sophisticated administrative structures and the delegation of authority to loyal officials and sheriffs. Henry implemented reforms to enhance the efficiency of taxation, judicial oversight, and military mobilization. Key to Henry II's legacy were his legal reforms, which created the basis for the English common law system. Assizes such as Clarendon, 1166, and Northampton, 1176, established standardized procedures for the investigation of crime and adjudication of disputes. The introduction of royal justices and the use of juries for fact-finding strengthened the Crown's legal authority and reduced the arbitrariness of local lordship. These measures also provided consistency across regions and laid the groundwork for trial by jury as a fundamental principle of English law. Relations with the Church during Henry II's reign were complex and frequently contentious. The most notable conflict involved Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, over the jurisdiction of secular and ecclesiastical courts. Disputes centered on whether clerics accused of serious crimes could be tried in royal courts or exclusively in ecclesiastical courts. The dispute culminated in Becket's murder in 1170 by knights acting under Henry's indirect orders. The event underscored the limits of royal power over the church and influenced subsequent relations between monarchy and ecclesiastical authorities for generations. Henry II's sons, Richard I and John, faced differing challenges that affected the monarchy's authority and resources. Richard I, known for his participation in the Third Crusade, spent little time in England and relied heavily on taxation and loans to fund his campaigns abroad. John, his successor, encountered resistance from barons due to military failures and fiscal pressures. The loss of Normandy and other continental possessions weakened the prestige of the monarchy and provoked baronial revolt. In 1215, these tensions resulted in the drafting and sealing of Magna Carta, which formalized constraints on royal authority, codified legal protections, and established principles of accountability that would influence English governance in the following centuries. Henry II ascended to the English throne in 1154, following the prolonged period of civil conflict known as the Anarchy. His accession marked the beginning of the Angevin dynasty and the establishment of what contemporaries recognized as a substantial Anglo-Norman empire spanning from Scotland to the Pyrenees through the inheritance of his mother Matilda and his father Geoffrey of Anjou. Henry II's inheritance included England, Normandy, Anjou, Maine, Touraine, and, through marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine in 1152, the extensive and economically significant Duchy of Aquitaine. The integration of these territories created a complex political landscape requiring effective administrative, legal, and military structures to govern both England and continental holdings. The Angevin Empire under Henry II was characterized by its duality. He needed to maintain authority over the English crown while simultaneously managing vast continental domains that were legally and culturally distinct. In England, Henry focused on consolidating royal power, reducing the autonomy of barons, and establishing mechanisms for centralized administration. On the continent, he relied on a combination of feudal obligations, strategic marriages, and military intervention to enforce loyalty among vassals and to defend territories against the ambitions of neighboring rulers, particularly Louis VII and later Philip II of France. One of the defining achievements of Henry II's reign was the systematic reform of the English legal system. Before his reign, law was largely administered by local lords and manorial courts, resulting in inconsistencies in justice and the exercise of power. Henry introduced reforms designed to establish a uniform system of royal justice across England. The assizes, including those of Clarendon in 1166, Northampton in 1176, and subsequent measures, created procedural standards for the investigation and prosecution of criminal and civil cases. Royal justices, appointed by the king and itinerant throughout the counties, ensured that cases could be heard under the authority of the crown rather than solely under local lordship. This initiative laid the groundwork for the emergence of common law, a system based on precedent, standardized procedures, and the authority of royal courts, which would endure as a foundation of English jurisprudence. A central element of Henry II's judicial reforms was the establishment of trial by jury as a method for ascertaining facts in legal disputes. Initially, juries functioned as panels of local men who could report on the circumstances of a case, particularly regarding property rights and criminal allegations. Over time, these juries became integral to the formal legal process, contributing to the centralization of authority and the predictability of justice across England. Henry II also codified measures for the recovery of lands and revenues, strengthening the financial foundation of the crown while providing formal legal avenues for barons and tenants to assert claims. The Angevin administration extended beyond legal reforms to include fiscal organization and bureaucratic oversight. Henry II relied on a network of sheriffs, chamberlains, and other royal officials to collect revenues, oversee the management of estates, and enforce compliance with royal directives. Taxation was implemented with increasing consistency, including feudal aids, scutage payments, and fines, which allowed the crown to fund both domestic administration and military campaigns abroad. The emphasis on documentation, record-keeping, and standardized procedures facilitated governance across diverse territories and underpinned the growth of an administrative state capable of balancing local autonomy with royal authority. Henry II's continental holdings necessitated ongoing military engagement to assert his rights and maintain control. In Normandy and Anjou, he faced periodic challenges from rebellious vassals and rival claimants. In Aquitaine, the integration of the duchy following his marriage to Eleanor required both diplomatic negotiation and military enforcement to secure loyalty among local lords. His conflicts with the French crown, particularly with Louis VII and later Philip II, were shaped by disputes over vassalage, territorial claims, and dynastic ambition. These military and political pressures reinforced the need for a strong central authority in England to support continental campaigns, influencing both domestic governance and the development of institutions such as royal courts and taxation systems. The relationship between Henry II and the Church emerged as a defining feature of his reign, marked by both cooperation and conflict. The most notable dispute involved Thomas Becket, appointed Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162. While initially intended to serve as an ally of the crown, Becket resisted royal interference in ecclesiastical matters, particularly regarding the jurisdiction of secular courts over clergy accused of criminal offenses. The Constitutions of Clarendon in 1164 codified Henry II's intention to limit clerical privilege and assert the Crown's authority over legal matters involving the clergy. Becket's refusal to comply with these measures led to a protracted confrontation, culminating in his murder in 1170 by 4 knights acting on his perception of the king's wishes. The assassination provoked widespread reaction, both in England and abroad, compelling Henry to make concessions to the church while simultaneously reaffirming his broader authority. The Becket controversy established a framework for subsequent interactions between monarchy and ecclesiastical power and influenced the development of legal and constitutional precedent regarding the limits of royal authority. Henry II's later reign was characterized by challenges arising from his own family. Following Henry II's death in 1189, Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, ascended to the throne. Richard's reign was dominated by his involvement in the Third Crusade, leaving England largely in the hands of administrators and local officials. The absence of the king for extended periods required effective delegation of authority, collection of revenues, and maintenance of law and order by the royal bureaucracy. Richard's taxation policies, including scutage and fines, were designed to finance military campaigns abroad and placed significant economic burdens on the population. While Richard's absence limited direct domestic engagement, it highlighted the importance of administrative continuity and the robustness of legal and fiscal structures established under Henry II. Richard's successor, John, assumed the throne in 1199. John faced considerable challenges in both domestic and foreign policy. Early in his reign, he lost significant territories in France, including Normandy, Maine, Anjou, and Touraine, to Philip II of France. These losses undermined the prestige of the monarchy and fueled discontent among the English barons, who were burdened with heavy taxation to support military recovery efforts. John's administrative measures attempted to consolidate royal authority and compensate for territorial losses through increased revenue extraction, centralized record-keeping, and judicial oversight. However, his methods generated resentment among barons and ecclesiastical authorities alike. The resulting baronial opposition culminated in the drafting and sealing of Magna Carta in 1215. This document represented a formal limitation on royal power, codifying specific rights of the barons and subjects, establishing principles of due process, and regulating taxation and feudal obligations. Magna Carta addressed grievances regarding arbitrary imprisonment, excessive fiscal demands, and interference with property rights, creating a legal framework that constrained the monarchy while recognizing its central authority. The charter also introduced mechanisms for accountability, including provisions for consultation with baronial representatives, laying a foundation for the later development of parliamentary structures. Throughout this period, England's political and social structures underwent substantial transformation. The feudal system, reinforced under Norman and Angevin rule, structured relationships between monarch, barons, knights, and tenants-in-chief, creating obligations of military service, taxation, and loyalty. The integration of legal reforms, particularly the development of common law and standardized procedures for royal courts, reduced regional variation in justice and strengthened central authority. Ecclesiastical institutions maintained influence over education, social services, and legal matters, while interaction with the monarchy led to the establishment of precedents regarding the limits of royal intervention. Economically, the Angevin period was marked by the growth of towns, the expansion of trade, and the increasing monetization of the economy. Market regulation, oversight of coinage, and fiscal policies ensured that royal revenues were reliable and could support military campaigns and administrative functions. The interaction between continental and English holdings facilitated the flow of goods, people, and ideas, contributing to the complexity and resilience of the Angevin administrative system. Population growth, urbanization, and the development of infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and ports, further enabled the centralization of governance and the collection of taxes and levies. By the conclusion of John's reign in 1216, the foundations established during the Angevin period had transformed England from a collection of semi-autonomous lordships into a kingdom with centralized legal, administrative, and fiscal structures. The Angevin experience demonstrated the importance of legal standardization, royal authority, and the integration of domestic and continental policy. Military campaigns, both on the continent and in response to internal rebellion, underscored the interdependence of fiscal capacity and political control. The combination of legal reforms, fiscal organization, and centralized administration enabled successive monarchs to navigate crises while gradually shaping a kingdom capable of enduring long-term political, social, and economic change. The period following the death of King John in 1216 marked a significant phase in the consolidation of royal authority and the gradual evolution of representative governance in England. John's son, Henry III, inherited the throne at the age of 9, during a period of instability and baronial unrest. The early years of Henry's reign were dominated by the Regency Council, composed of senior nobles and ecclesiastical figures tasked with safeguarding royal interests while the young king matured. Henry's minority highlighted the delicate balance between monarchy and baronial authority, a theme that would shape the political development of England throughout the 13th century. Henry III formally assumed personal rule in 1227, though his reign was characterized by repeated tensions with the nobility and intermittent challenges to royal authority. His attempts to centralize power and expand the influence of the monarchy often clashed with baronial expectations regarding autonomy, land tenure, and fiscal obligations. The king's policies, including extensive expenditure on continental campaigns and religious institutions, placed significant pressure on royal finances, necessitating negotiation and consultation with the barons regarding taxation and fiscal levies. This negotiation contributed to the gradual institutionalization of parliamentary procedures, as consultation with the realm's leading figures became an essential mechanism for securing consent and compliance. One of the most prominent conflicts of Henry III's reign was the baronial revolt led by Simon de Montfort between 1264 and 1265. Discontent arose from the king's favoritism toward foreign advisors, excessive expenditure, and perceived disregard for established baronial privileges. De Montfort, Earl of Leicester, mobilized a coalition of dissatisfied nobles and urban representatives to challenge the crown, resulting in armed confrontation at the Battle of Lewes in 1264. The revolt temporarily placed de Montfort in control of government and highlighted the necessity for formal mechanisms through which the monarchy could negotiate with the broader political community. During de Montfort's administration, the Parliament of 1265 was convened, a landmark in English political development. For the first time, representatives of shires and boroughs, knights and burgesses, were summoned alongside barons and clergy, creating a representative assembly that incorporated urban and rural interests. This development laid the foundation for subsequent parliaments and introduced the principle that taxation and governance required consultation with the realm's broader stakeholders. While de Montfort's ascendancy was ultimately curtailed with his defeat at the Battle of Evesham in 1265 and the restoration of Henry III's authority, the procedural innovations of this period persisted, contributing to the gradual institutionalization of parliamentary structures and the evolution of English constitutional practice. Henry III's later reign included ongoing efforts to consolidate royal authority through legal, administrative, and military initiatives. The king sought to regulate the collection of revenues, standardize legal procedures, and assert control over territorial disputes. Royal justices continued the reforms initiated under Henry II, extending itinerant justice to counties and establishing mechanisms for appeals to royal courts. These measures strengthened the Crown's capacity to oversee local governance and maintain the supremacy of central authority over the kingdom. Henry III also focused on relations with the Church, promoting ecclesiastical patronage and constructing monumental religious institutions, including Westminster Abbey. While these projects enhanced the king's prestige, they placed significant demands on the royal treasury and required negotiation with barons for fiscal support. The combination of ambitious building programs and military campaigns abroad created a cycle of revenue collection and political negotiation that reinforced the necessity for consultation with representative assemblies, further entrenching parliamentary practice within English governance. Following Henry III's death in 1272, his son Edward I ascended to the throne, inheriting a kingdom marked by ongoing fiscal, legal, and territorial challenges. Edward's reign represented a systematic effort to strengthen royal authority while formalizing institutions that would provide enduring structures of governance. Militarily, Edward I pursued campaigns in Wales and Scotland, asserting English dominion over neighboring territories and integrating these regions into the administrative framework of the kingdom. These campaigns required substantial resources and logistical planning, emphasizing the importance of parliamentary consent for taxation and the mobilization of military forces. Edward's conquest of Wales, beginning in 1277 and culminating in the annexation of the principality following campaigns in 1282 to 1283, demonstrates the intersection of military and administrative innovation. Following the defeat of Llywelyn ap Griffith, Edward implemented a system of counties and marcher lordships to administer Welsh territories, extending English law, taxation, and governance structures. Castles and administrative centers were established to enforce royal authority and ensure the integration of local populations into the legal and fiscal framework of the kingdom. This model of territorial control reflected a systematic approach to governance that combined military dominance with bureaucratic oversight. Edward I also initiated significant reforms in Scotland, asserting overlordship and engaging in military campaigns to enforce English claims. His interventions culminated in protracted conflicts with Scottish nobility and the eventual succession crisis following the death of Alexander III. Edward's involvement in Scottish affairs highlights the transnational dimension of the English monarchy and the strategic importance of integrating external territories under English administrative and legal systems. The prolonged military engagements in Wales and Scotland required sustained parliamentary support for taxation and the provision of men-at-arms, reinforcing the procedural norm of consulting representative assemblies for financial and military matters. The Model Parliament of 1295 represents a critical institutional development in Edward I's reign. Unlike earlier parliaments, which primarily included barons and ecclesiastical figures, the Model Parliament incorporated elected representatives from shires and boroughs, formalizing the inclusion of knights and burgesses in deliberations concerning taxation and governance. This assembly established a precedent for regular consultation between the monarchy and the broader political community, linking fiscal authority to representation and embedding the principle that consent from multiple estates was necessary for the implementation of royal policies. The Model Parliament contributed to the long-term development of bicameral structures, the articulation of parliamentary privileges, and the procedural norms that would define English legislative practice in subsequent centuries. Edward I's administration also focused on legal consolidation and codification. He enacted statutes aimed at clarifying land tenure, property rights, and the obligations of tenants, ensuring consistency across the kingdom. The Statutes of Westminster, first enacted in 1275 and subsequently revised in 1285 and 1290, codified regulations regarding inheritance, wardship, and the responsibilities of lords and tenants. These statutes reinforced the authority of the crown over feudal relationships, standardized legal procedures, and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes. Additionally, Edward implemented measures to regulate the minting of coinage, control market practices, and oversee trade, further integrating economic governance into the broader administrative framework. Throughout this period, the monarchy faced persistent challenges from regional and local authorities, including baronial families, ecclesiastical leaders, and urban representatives. Negotiation, coercion, and formalized legal and administrative structures allowed the crown to assert authority while balancing the interests of powerful stakeholders. The integration of parliamentary consultation into fiscal and legal governance provided a mechanism for institutionalized negotiation, reducing the likelihood of open conflict while ensuring that royal policies were implemented with a degree of legitimacy and consent. Edward I's reign also reflects the evolving relationship between monarchy and law. Royal courts continued to assert jurisdiction over criminal and civil matters, while the king exercised oversight of local courts to ensure the uniform application of legal principles. The expansion of legal bureaucracy, including the appointment of royal justices and the use of itinerant commissions, enabled the crown to monitor adherence to statutes, enforce fiscal obligations, and manage disputes over property and rights. These legal developments strengthened the authority of the monarchy and reinforced the centralization of governance, while maintaining avenues for redress and accountability through formal procedures. Economically, the period 1216 to 1307 witnessed the growth of towns, trade networks, and urban institutions. The inclusion of borough representatives in Parliament reflected the increasing economic significance of towns, which generated revenues through markets, tolls, and taxation. Urban centers provided the crown with sources of fiscal support and administrative engagement, while also serving as focal points for the dissemination of legal norms and the enforcement of royal authority. The integration of urban and rural interests into parliamentary procedures contributed to the evolution of representative governance and facilitated the implementation of policies across diverse regions of the kingdom. Socially, the consolidation of royal authority under Henry III and Edward I had significant implications for the feudal hierarchy. Barons retained substantial influence, yet their autonomy was moderated by legal obligations, taxation, and parliamentary consultation. Knights and lesser tenants increasingly engaged with both the legal system and fiscal mechanisms, reinforcing their obligations to the crown. Peasant communities experienced indirect effects of these developments through standardized taxation, enforcement of labor obligations, and the imposition of legal regulations governing land use, inheritance, and tenure. The interplay of central authority and local administration shaped a hierarchical society with defined obligations and structured avenues for legal redress. By the end of Edward I's reign in 1307, England had developed an administrative and political infrastructure that combined centralized authority, standardized legal procedures, and representative consultation. The monarchy's ability to mobilize military resources, collect revenue, and enforce law was closely linked to institutionalized mechanisms for negotiation with barons, clergy, and urban representatives. Parliamentary assemblies, evolving from ad hoc consultations to structured deliberative bodies, established precedents for the integration of multiple estates into governance, setting the stage for the continued development of English constitutional practice. The accession of Edward II in 1307 marked the beginning of a turbulent period in English history, characterized by military setbacks, domestic instability, and challenges to royal authority. Edward II inherited a kingdom with established administrative structures and a functioning parliamentary framework developed under Edward I, yet his personal weaknesses and political mismanagement undermined these institutional advantages. Early in his reign, Edward faced discontent among the nobility due to his favoritism toward a small circle of advisors, notably Piers Gaveston, whose influence sparked resentment among established baronial families. Edward II's military leadership proved inadequate, particularly in the context of ongoing conflicts with Scotland. The Wars of Scottish Independence, initiated by Edward I, continued under Edward II, with significant setbacks for English forces. Domestically, Edward II's reign was marked by baronial opposition that culminated in a series of conflicts over governance and influence. The ordinances of 1311, imposed by a group of magnates led by Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, attempted to limit the king's authority by restricting the appointment of officials, imposing fiscal controls, and regulating royal expenditures. These measures represented an extension of parliamentary influence, asserting the principle that royal policies required baronial consent and oversight. Edward II's failure to comply fully with these ordinances contributed to political instability, factional rivalry, and periodic civil unrest. The culmination of domestic conflict occurred with the invasion of England by Queen Isabella, Edward II's estranged wife, and her ally Roger Mortimer in 1326. Discontent with Edward's favoritism, fiscal mismanagement, and military failures justified their intervention. Edward was captured, deposed, and ultimately murdered in 1327, allowing his son Edward III to ascend the throne at the age of 14. The early years of Edward III, reign were dominated by Mortimer and Isabella as de facto rulers. But the young king gradually asserted personal authority, culminating in Mortimer's execution in 1330 and the establishment of direct royal control. Edward III's reign, 1327 to 1377, represented a period of relative stabilization and expansion of royal authority, coupled with renewed engagement in continental affairs. Claiming the French throne through his mother, Isabella, Edward asserted a hereditary claim that formed the basis for the Hundred Years' War. Initiated in 1337, the war was grounded in disputes over succession, territorial rights, and feudal obligations, particularly regarding English possessions in France, such as Gascony. The conflict shaped both domestic and foreign policy, necessitating fiscal innovation, parliamentary consultation, and military reform. English victories in the early stages of the Hundred Years' War demonstrated the effectiveness of strategic military organization, the application of longbowmen, and coordinated cavalry and infantry tactics. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, Edward III's army of approximately 12,000 men, including significant contingents of longbowmen, decisively defeated a larger French force. The engagement demonstrated the tactical advantages of disciplined archery, defensive positioning, and combined arms coordination. A decade later, at the Battle of Poitiers in 1356, English forces captured the French king, John II, further consolidating military prestige and enabling negotiation of advantageous treaties. These victories reinforced Edward III's authority and facilitated domestic stability, while enhancing the reputation of England as a military power. Economic conditions during the first half of the 14th century were complex, characterized by population growth, urban expansion, and increasing monetization of the economy. Taxation was required to fund continental campaigns, with Parliament approving subsidies, scutage, and other levies to sustain military expenditure. The Crown's fiscal strategies emphasized efficiency, record-keeping, and accountability, reflecting lessons learned from prior reigns regarding the relationship between revenue, representation, and legitimacy. However, these financial demands created tension with the nobility and commons, laying the groundwork for negotiation and the institutionalization of parliamentary consent for taxation. The latter part of Edward III's reign was profoundly affected by the outbreak of the Black Death in 1348 to 1351. The plague struck England with devastating demographic impact, reducing the population by an estimated 1/3 to 1/2. Mortality rates varied regionally, with urban centers experiencing particularly high losses due to dense population and poor sanitation. The labor shortage disrupted agriculture, diminished the supply of skilled artisans, and weakened traditional feudal obligations. Estates formerly managed by peasant laborers faced declining productivity, and the scarcity of labor contributed to rising wages, increased mobility, and shifts in social and economic power. In response to these demographic and economic pressures, Parliament enacted the Statute of Laborers in 1351, aiming to regulate wages, limit labor mobility, and stabilize economic structures. The legislation attempted to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, compelling laborers to work for customary compensation despite labor scarcity. Enforcement was inconsistent, reflecting both local resistance and the challenges of implementing top-down policies across a fragmented administrative landscape. The statute underscored the evolving role of Parliament in addressing economic and social crises, providing a mechanism for royal authority to intervene in the regulation of labor and markets. The interplay of economic pressure and social unrest was further exemplified by peasant revolts in the latter 14th century. While the most notable revolt occurred in 1381 under Richard II, early expressions of social tension emerged in the decades following the Black Death. The demographic decline increased bargaining power for laborers and created tensions between customary obligations and economic reality. Barons and royal officials faced persistent challenges in enforcing traditional labor arrangements, leading to the gradual erosion of feudal rigidity and contributing to the evolution of social and economic structures. In addition to economic and military factors, Edward III's reign involved legal and administrative reform aimed at consolidating royal authority. The expansion of royal courts and itinerant justices facilitated the standardization of legal procedure across the kingdom. Assizes, writs, and appeals provided mechanisms for resolving disputes over land, inheritance, and taxation. The integration of representative assemblies, particularly for the purpose of approving fiscal measures, strengthened the connection between legal authority, administrative oversight, and parliamentary consultation. These measures reinforced the centrality of the crown while providing procedural avenues for dispute resolution, ensuring continuity and stability despite ongoing military and demographic pressures. Religious institutions maintained a prominent role during Edward III's reign, influencing education, social welfare, and local governance. Monasteries and parish churches continued to operate as centers of social and economic activity, administering relief to the poor, managing estates, and providing education. The crown engaged with ecclesiastical authorities to secure support for taxation, military campaigns, and legal reforms. The relationship between monarchy and church remained carefully negotiated, balancing royal prerogative with ecclesiastical privilege and doctrinal authority. Edward III also engaged in systematic diplomatic efforts to manage relations with continental powers. Treaties, marriage alliances, and negotiations regarding territorial claims complemented military strategy, reflecting the importance of integrated foreign policy in sustaining the Angevin legacy and asserting English interests abroad. Engagement with France, Scotland, the Holy Roman Empire, and Iberian kingdoms involved complex negotiation of feudal obligations, claims of suzerainty, and the coordination of joint military operations, illustrating the transnational dimension of English governance and diplomacy during this period. The culmination of Edward III's reign in 1377 left a kingdom shaped by military achievement, economic transformation, and legal consolidation. Despite successes abroad, England faced ongoing challenges in population recovery, fiscal stability, and social cohesion following the Black Death. The reforms of Edward III reinforced the role of Parliament in approving taxation and mediating political conflict, while royal legal and administrative structures ensured continuity of governance across diverse regions. The period established enduring precedents in the integration of military, fiscal, and legal authority, contributing to the resilience and adaptability of the monarchy and laying the groundwork for subsequent developments in 14th century England. The combination of military campaigns, parliamentary evolution, legal standardization, and administrative oversight during the reigns of Edward II and Edward III demonstrates the interplay between domestic governance and external pressures. Failures, such as Edward II's military and political mismanagement, highlight vulnerabilities in personal monarchy, whereas successes under Edward III underscore the importance of centralized authority, effective fiscal policy, and the integration of representative consultation. These developments shaped the trajectory of England in the 14th century, providing lessons in governance, institutional resilience, and the management of both social and external challenges. The period from 1348 to 1381 in England was profoundly shaped by the demographic, economic, and social consequences of the Black Death, one of the most catastrophic pandemics in European history. The disease, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and transmitted primarily through flea-infested rodents, arrived in England in the autumn of 1348, likely through ports such as Melcombe Regis, Weymouth, and Bristol, which were active centers of continental trade. Its spread was rapid, facilitated by dense urban populations, the movement of merchants, pilgrims, and armies, and limited understanding of contagion. Contemporary estimates suggest that between 30 and 50% of the English population perished during the initial outbreak, with some regions, particularly urban centers and commercial towns, experiencing mortality rates closer to 60%. The demographic impact of the Black Death was unprecedented. Rural communities, dependent on agricultural labor, faced severe shortages of workers. Manor records indicate that entire villages were depopulated, leaving arable land uncultivated and disrupting feudal obligations. Skilled labor in crafts and trades similarly declined, affecting urban centers, guilds, and workshops. The scarcity of labor led to a rapid increase in wages for surviving workers, mobility between estates, and the ability to negotiate terms of service. Traditional patterns of tenancy, manorial dues, and feudal obligations were increasingly difficult to enforce, undermining the economic foundations of the nobility and highlighting the dependence of landlords on a stable labor force. In response to the labor crisis and the threat to social stability, the English crown enacted the Statute of Laborers in 1351. This legislation aimed to freeze wages at pre-plague levels, prevent excessive mobility of laborers, and require able-bodied workers to accept employment at customary rates. The statute was enforced by local officials, sheriffs, and justices of the peace, with penalties for noncompliance, including fines and imprisonment. Enforcement proved inconsistent due to widespread resistance, geographic variation in labor supply, and the inability of local authorities to fully implement royal mandates. Nevertheless, the statute represents a critical intervention by the Crown in regulating the post-plague economy, reflecting the interaction between central authority and local governance in maintaining social order. The economic consequences of the Black Death extended beyond labor shortages. Agricultural production declined due to both reduced manpower and abandoned lands, causing fluctuations in prices for crops, livestock, and essential commodities. Simultaneously, the relative scarcity of labor and increased bargaining power for workers led to a shift in the balance of economic power between landlords and tenants. Rents and customary services were increasingly commuted to monetary payments, and the growing prevalence of wage labor in agriculture and urban industries contributed to the gradual erosion of rigid feudal structures. The Crown's fiscal policies, including taxation and fines, had to adapt to these demographic and economic changes, requiring negotiation with Parliament for approval of subsidies and extraordinary levies. The social consequences of the Black Death were equally profound. Surviving peasants and laborers, aware of their enhanced bargaining position, sought to assert economic and social rights more effectively. This shift in social dynamics challenged the entrenched hierarchies of feudal society, increasing tension between ruling elites and commoners. In towns and cities, the population reduction disrupted guild structures, commercial networks, and municipal administration, necessitating reforms and adaptations to maintain urban functionality and civic order. The Crown's engagement with urban centers, including the summoning of representatives to Parliament, facilitated the incorporation of towns into broader fiscal and administrative systems, linking demographic change to institutional development. By the mid-14th century, continued economic strain and the perceived failure of the crown and nobility to respond adequately to the pressures of labor scarcity, taxation, and regulation fueled widespread unrest. In 1381, these underlying grievances culminated in the Peasants' Revolt, a coordinated uprising led by figures such as Wat Tyler in Kent and John Ball, a radical preacher advocating for social reform. The revolt was triggered by the imposition of the poll tax of 1381, a flat tax levied on individuals regardless of income, which exacerbated existing resentment over economic hardship, labor restrictions, and feudal obligations. The revolt spread rapidly through southeastern England, with rebels targeting local officials, tax collectors, and symbols of authority. The Peasants' Revolt demonstrated the potential for coordinated action among disparate groups of laborers, smallholders, and urban workers. Rebels demanded the abolition of serfdom, reduction of feudal dues, and equitable treatment in law and governance. While initially effective in mobilizing large numbers, the revolt faced challenges in organization, leadership, and negotiation with royal authorities. King Richard II, then only 14 years old, engaged with rebel leaders, including an audience with Wat Tyler at Smithfield. The promises made by the crown during these negotiations were later rescinded, and royal forces suppressed the uprising, resulting in the execution of leaders and the reassertion of noble authority. Despite the immediate suppression of the revolt, the long-term effects of demographic and social upheaval were enduring. Feudal obligations continued to decline in practical enforcement. Wages and mobility for laborers remained elevated compared to pre-plague levels, and landowners increasingly relied on monetary rents and wage labor rather than compulsory service. The revolt highlighted the limitations of coercive enforcement in the context of widespread social and economic change, illustrating the interplay between demographic crisis, labor dynamics, and political authority. The period also witnessed adaptations in governance and parliamentary procedure. The Crown's need to raise funds for military campaigns and maintain public order required consultation with both barons and representatives of towns, further institutionalizing parliamentary participation. The inclusion of borough representatives in fiscal deliberations reflected the growing significance of urban populations in the kingdom's economy and the need to integrate diverse constituencies into governance. Parliamentary practice evolved to accommodate negotiation and consent, linking fiscal authority to representation and establishing precedents for subsequent legislative development. Military obligations were similarly affected by the demographic crisis. The reduction in available manpower required adjustments in recruitment, training, and organization of forces. Retainers, mercenaries, and professional soldiers became increasingly important, while the reliance on feudal levies diminished. The crown implemented measures to ensure the efficient mobilization of resources, combining royal authority, parliamentary approval, and local administration to maintain defensive and offensive capabilities. The integration of military, fiscal, and administrative structures during this period reflects the adaptability of English governance in response to external and internal pressures. Religious institutions played a significant role in mediating social tensions and providing relief in the aftermath of the Black Death. Monasteries, convents, and parish churches offered aid to the sick and destitute, administered charitable distributions, and maintained records of demographic and economic change. Clergy also engaged in moral and doctrinal discourse addressing the causes and consequences of the plague, framing societal responses and influencing public perception. The interaction between religious institutions, local authorities, and the crown underscores the multifaceted role of the church in both governance and social stability during periods of crisis. The combination of demographic collapse, economic disruption, and social unrest led to adjustments in legal and administrative structures. Manorial courts and local jurisdictions were increasingly involved in regulating disputes over labor, tenancy, and property, while royal courts and justices ensured the standardization of legal practices across counties. The Crown's interventions in labor regulation, taxation, and military organization were mediated through Parliament, reflecting the increasing centrality of representative consultation in governance. These developments reinforced the adaptability and resilience of English institutions in the face of unprecedented challenges. Urban centers experienced parallel transformations. Towns such as London, Norwich, and York adapted to population loss by consolidating guild structures, regulating trade, and engaging with the crown in fiscal matters. The integration of urban interests into parliamentary proceedings reflected both economic significance and demographic necessity, linking municipal governance to national policy. The interdependence of rural and urban populations in sustaining the kingdom's economy and political structures was highlighted during this period, emphasizing the systemic impact of the Black Death. By 1381, England's social hierarchy had been fundamentally altered. While serfdom was not abolished immediately, the balance of power shifted in favor of laborers, tenants, and urban populations. The decline in rigid feudal obligations, the growth of wage labor, and increased mobility laid the foundation for further social and economic transformation in the late medieval period. The Peasants' Revolt, despite its failure to achieve immediate objectives, exemplified the capacity of popular movements to influence governance, highlighting the evolving relationship between crown, nobility, and commoners. The period also illustrates the interrelation between economic policy, demographic change, and legal reform. The crown's enactment of wage controls, regulation of labor, and enforcement of taxation demonstrates the attempt to balance fiscal necessity with social stability. Local enforcement, adaptation to population shifts, and integration with broader legal frameworks reflect the complex mechanisms by which governance responded to structural crises. These interventions reinforced the role of central authority while highlighting the limitations of coercion in the face of widespread demographic and social transformation. The Black Death and subsequent social upheaval thus represent a critical juncture in English medieval history. The interaction of demographic collapse, labor scarcity, fiscal pressures, legal regulation, and parliamentary evolution shaped the trajectory of the kingdom, establishing precedents in governance, social organization, and economic management. By the conclusion of this period, England faced a transformed social and economic landscape, with laborers and tenants exercising increased leverage, urban centers integrated into national administration, and the crown reliant upon negotiation and institutional structures to maintain authority. The accession of Richard II in 1377 marked a critical period in English medieval history, characterized by the decline of the Plantagenet dynasty, political instability, and the eventual rise of the House of Lancaster. Richard, aged only 10 at the time of his father Edward III's death, inherited a kingdom still recovering from the demographic, economic, and social upheavals caused by the Black Death and the Peasants' Revolt. The young king's minority, like those of Henry III and Edward III, required the intervention of a regency council composed of senior nobles and clergy to oversee the administration of the realm and manage fiscal, military, and legal obligations. Early in his reign, England continued to confront the ongoing challenges of the Hundred Years' War with France. Edward III's territorial claims and military campaigns in France had been interrupted by intermittent truces and internal crises. Richard II inherited not only the military and diplomatic entanglements in France, but also the financial pressures required to maintain English holdings on the continent. Funding military expeditions necessitated continued reliance on parliamentary taxation, reinforcing the precedent that consent for extraordinary levies required negotiation with representatives of shires and boroughs. These early experiences emphasized the dependence of the crown upon institutional structures to sustain authority in the context of external conflict and domestic uncertainty. Domestically, the kingdom faced ongoing political tension arising from factional rivalries among the nobility. During Richard II's minority, the Regency Council struggled to maintain unity, as competing baronial factions vied for influence over royal decision-making. The period was marked by local disturbances, challenges to royal justice, and periodic disputes over land and fiscal obligations. The crown's capacity to enforce authority was limited by regional variation in baronial power, and the persistence of autonomous local governance, highlighting the delicate balance between central control and the influence of powerful magnates. One of the most significant events of Richard II's reign was the reassertion of royal authority following the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, which occurred during the early years of his personal rule. Although Richard, then 14, had personally engaged with rebel leaders, the revolt's suppression was carried out by loyalist forces and established the precedent for the enforcement of law through both royal and baronial authority. The revolt underscored the latent social tensions that persisted in post-plague England, including demands for reduced taxation, greater mobility for laborers, and reform of feudal obligations. The crown's response combined negotiation, promises of reform, and coercion, reflecting the interplay of authority, legitimacy, and enforcement in governance. English forces inflicted heavy casualties on the French, while English losses were comparatively minimal. The battle solidified Henry's military reputation, reinforced English claims in France, and demonstrated the effectiveness of disciplined strategy, longbow deployment, and the integration of infantry and cavalry in late medieval warfare. Following Agincourt, Henry V consolidated his position in northern France through sieges, territorial administration, and diplomacy. Strategic towns, castles, and fortifications were secured to maintain supply lines, control local populations, and provide bases for further military operations. Henry also worked to integrate captured territories into English governance, employing local officials, garrisons, and legal mechanisms to enforce order and loyalty. The administration of conquered regions required adaptation to local law, feudal obligations, and social structures, demonstrating the interplay between military conquest and practical governance. Henry's diplomatic efforts were equally significant, culminating in the Treaty of Troyes in 1420. This agreement recognized Henry as heir to the French throne and regent of France during the lifetime of Charles VI, effectively uniting the crowns of England and France under Henry's lineage. The treaty was achieved through negotiation, military leverage, and strategic marriage alliances, including Henry's marriage to Catherine of Valois, daughter of Charles VI. The treaty represented a high point of English diplomacy and dynastic ambition, reflecting the successful combination of military, legal, and marital strategy in asserting international authority. The governance of England during Henry V's absences in France required careful coordination between royal officials, regional authorities, and Parliament. The Crown relied on trusted deputies, councils, and justices to manage taxation, legal affairs, and military recruitment. Parliamentary approval was essential for funding continued campaigns, and Henry maintained communication with representatives of shires and boroughs to ensure compliance and support. This system of delegated authority, combined with central oversight, enabled sustained military operations abroad without compromising internal stability, demonstrating the administrative capacity of the English monarchy during this period. Economic and fiscal policy under Henry V was closely tied to military expenditure. The Crown levied taxes, including subsidies, tallage, and customs duties, to fund campaigns and maintain garrisons. Parliament played a critical role in authorizing these levies, reflecting the institutionalization of representative consultation in fiscal matters. Audits, accounts, and local enforcement mechanisms ensured that resources were collected efficiently and directed toward military objectives. These fiscal practices illustrate the integration of administrative structures, parliamentary negotiation, and regional compliance in sustaining prolonged warfare. Henry's reign also reinforced the relationship between the monarchy and the church. Ecclesiastical authorities provided support for taxation, recruitment, and moral justification of military campaigns. Clergy played roles in educating troops, recording events, and administering local governance, while monasteries and parishes contributed materially and logistically to the war effort. The coordination between religious institutions and the Crown exemplifies the multifaceted nature of governance in late medieval England, where spiritual authority, social administration, and political control were interdependent. Socially, Henry V's campaigns influenced the dynamics of English society. Military service offered opportunities for advancement, status, and economic reward for knights, men-at-arms, and longbowmen. Laborers and urban populations experienced both the demands of taxation to support war and the economic opportunities created by the mobilization of resources. Landowners benefited from the reassessment of estates, forfeiture of rebellious property, and opportunities for engagement in military logistics and provisioning. These developments reflect the interconnection of warfare, economic activity, and social mobility in early 15th century England. Henry V's domestic policies reinforced the centralization of authority and the efficiency of governance. The use of commissions, justices of the peace, and royal officers allowed for consistent enforcement of law and fiscal policy across England. The Crown monitored local administration, intervened in disputes, and ensured the implementation of statutes related to property, labor, and taxation. These mechanisms maintained order, supported the financing of campaigns abroad, and strengthened the institutional framework of the monarchy. The combination of centralized administration and delegated local authority enabled England to sustain extensive military operations while preserving internal stability. The king's foreign policy extended beyond France, addressing concerns in Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. Although the primary focus was the Continental Campaign, Henry maintained defensive measures and diplomatic engagement with neighboring territories to prevent uprisings or external intervention. This comprehensive approach to security and governance reflects the strategic awareness of the Crown and the integration of military, political, and administrative planning. By the conclusion of Henry V's reign in 1422, England had achieved a high point in territorial ambition, military effectiveness, and dynastic assertion. The death of Henry, however, left the throne to his infant son, Henry VI, creating a complex succession that required regency governance in both England and France. Despite this uncertainty, Henry V's reign established enduring precedents in military strategy, administrative efficiency, parliamentary collaboration, and diplomatic negotiation. The institutional, fiscal, and social mechanisms developed during this period would influence the management of the English kingdom throughout the early 15th century and provide a foundation for both military and political endeavors under subsequent monarchs. Henry V's campaigns also had long-term consequences for Anglo-French relations, the evolution of warfare, and the structure of English society. The emphasis on professionalized armies, combined arms tactics, and disciplined longbow units set standards for military organization in subsequent decades. Territorial acquisitions in northern France required sustained administrative oversight, integrating local populations into English governance and extending royal legal and fiscal structures abroad. These achievements reflected the convergence of strategic, administrative, and institutional competence, illustrating the comprehensive nature of the monarchy during periods of ambition and expansion. The period also highlighted the role of Parliament and representative assemblies in legitimizing taxation and ensuring compliance with royal policy. Parliamentary approval for subsidies and extraordinary levies reinforced the link between fiscal necessity and institutional consultation. The Crown's coordination with shires and boroughs, combined with local enforcement, ensured that military campaigns could be supported without compromising domestic order. This relationship between monarchy, parliament, and local governance exemplifies the structural resilience of English institutions and their capacity to respond to sustained external engagement. The accession of Henry VI in 1422 introduced a period of prolonged instability in England, culminating in the dynastic conflict known as the Wars of the Roses, which lasted intermittently until 1485. Henry VI, son of Henry V and Catherine of Valois, inherited the English crown at the age of 9 months, immediately necessitating regency governance due to his infancy. Concurrently, he inherited the English claims to the French crown established by the Treaty of Troyes, creating the complex circumstance of a minor king presiding over two kingdoms. The regency, initially led by his uncle John, Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, was charged with managing both domestic affairs in England and military campaigns in France, a dual responsibility that exposed tensions within the English administration. The governance of England during Henry VI's minority relied upon experienced magnates, the royal council, and the oversight of Parliament. Regency administration balanced domestic management with foreign campaigns, ensuring taxation, legal enforcement, and military provisioning were maintained in the absence of direct royal authority. Financial pressure was significant, maintaining garrisons in Normandy, securing towns in northern France, and funding mercenary forces required continued parliamentary subsidies, which reinforced the necessity of representative consent in fiscal matters. Despite these administrative mechanisms, the prolonged minority created opportunities for factionalism and power struggles among English nobles, with competing interests undermining centralized authority and contributing to political instability. Military efforts in France during Henry VI's minority were increasingly precarious. The English retained control over significant northern territories, including Normandy, Maine, and parts of Aquitaine, but faced persistent resistance from French forces under Charles VII. Strategic setbacks, logistical challenges, and shifting allegiances among the French nobility gradually eroded English positions. By the 1440s, territorial losses became increasingly pronounced, culminating in the eventual reconquest of Normandy by French forces in 1450 and the collapse of English holdings in northern France. The failure to maintain these territories reflected both the limitations of extended military occupation and the difficulties inherent in managing dual kingdoms under Regency governance. Domestically, Henry VI's reign was marked by weakness, indecision, and political factionalism. His inability to assert authority effectively over the nobility created a vacuum in which baronial power expanded. Key magnates, including Richard, Duke of York, the Mortimers, and other powerful regional families, engaged in disputes over offices, land, and influence within the royal household and broader administration. The crown's dependence on parliamentary consent for taxation, combined with the absence of strong personal authority, exacerbated the potential for conflict, as factions utilized institutional mechanisms to challenge policy and assert local or personal interests. The loss of English territories in France further undermined Henry VI's legitimacy and contributed to political unrest. The collapse of the English position following the reconquest of Normandy, coupled with the ongoing costs of maintaining garrisons and mercenary forces, strained royal finances and exposed the monarchy to criticism. Nobles and Parliament increasingly questioned the crown's competence, fueling rivalries and fostering conditions for dynastic dispute. These developments created an environment in which challenges to authority, both legal and military, became feasible, paving the way for the eventual outbreak of civil war. By the mid-1450s, tensions between the House of Lancaster, represented by Henry VI, and the House of York, led by Richard, Duke of York, escalated into open conflict. Richard of York, leveraging his lineage, offices, and military experience, asserted claims to influence governance and, ultimately, to the throne itself. The claim of York was partially based on descent from Edward III's second surviving son, a line he argued provided greater legitimacy than the Lancastrian branch descending from John of Gaunt, Edward III's third son. This dynastic argument, combined with dissatisfaction among magnates and gentry, facilitated the mobilization of armed forces and regional support, marking the beginning of the Wars of the Roses. The first phase of the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1460, was initiated with the First Battle of St. Albans in 1455, in which Yorkist forces, commanded by Richard, Duke of York, defeated a Lancastrian army and captured Henry VI. This engagement established the precedent for armed conflict as a method of resolving dynastic disputes in England, emphasizing the weaknesses of the crown and the prominence of regional magnates in military mobilization. Subsequent skirmishes, including battles at Blore Heath, 1459, and Northampton, 1460, continued to demonstrate the volatility of the political landscape and the capacity of armed factions to challenge royal authority effectively. Following the Yorkist successes, the Act of Accord in 1460 attempted to resolve the dynastic dispute by recognizing Henry VI as king while designating Richard of York and his heirs as successors. This compromise, however, failed to prevent continued conflict, as it neither satisfied Lancastrian loyalists nor fully consolidated Yorkist authority. The political instability was exacerbated by Henry VI's intermittent periods of incapacity, including mental illness, which rendered him unable to exercise effective governance and further eroded the perception of legitimate royal authority. The death of Richard, Duke of York, at the Battle of Wakefield in 1460 intensified the dynastic struggle, as his claim was inherited by his son, Edward IV. Edward's military acumen and organizational skill allowed him to consolidate Yorkist control, culminating in the decisive Battle of Towton in 1461, which secured Edward IV's ascension to the throne and temporarily displaced Lancastrian influence. Edward IV's reign represented a period of relative stabilization under Yorkist dominance, supported by strategic alliances with key magnates, careful management of regional power structures, and reinforcement of central administrative authority. Despite Edward IV's consolidation, Lancastrian resistance persisted, particularly under Henry VI's queen, Margaret of Anjou, who commanded loyalty among southern and western magnates. Edward IV faced intermittent rebellions, including the brief restoration of Henry VI during the readeption of 1470 to 1471, which required rapid military campaigns and decisive engagement at the Battle of Barnet and the Battle of Tewkesbury to re-establish Yorkist control. The death of Henry VI at the conclusion of these campaigns eliminated the immediate Lancastrian threat, allowing Edward IV to consolidate power, enforce administrative authority, and stabilize governance for the remainder of his reign. The period following Edward IV's death in 1483 saw renewed dynastic conflict with the succession of Richard III, Edward's brother. Richard's assumption of the throne, following the declaration that Edward's sons were illegitimate, generated opposition from both Yorkist loyalists and Lancastrian supporters. Richard III's rule, though initially supported in parts of northern England, faced significant resistance, ultimately leading to confrontation with Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian claimant through maternal descent from John of Gaunt. The culmination of the Wars of the Roses occurred at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, in which Richard III was killed, and Henry Tudor claimed the crown as Henry VII. This event marked the final resolution of the dynastic struggle between Lancaster and York, ending the Plantagenet line and establishing the Tudor dynasty. The transition reflected both military resolution and dynastic legitimacy, demonstrating the intertwining of hereditary claim, martial capacity, and political negotiation in determining royal succession. The Wars of the Roses had profound consequences for the social, political, and institutional structures of England. Nobility and magnates experienced repeated cycles of land confiscation, forfeiture, and redistribution, leading to significant shifts in property ownership and regional influence. Administrative continuity was challenged, as local officials and royal agents had to navigate shifting allegiances, while Parliament increasingly served as a forum for legitimizing transfers of land, taxation, and titles. These developments reinforced the capacity of centralized authority to enforce legal and fiscal mechanisms despite the instability of dynastic rule. Military organization during the Wars of the Roses evolved significantly, reflecting adaptations to the demands of civil war. The crown and regional magnates relied upon professional retainers, garrisons, and paid infantry, complementing traditional feudal levies. Longbowmen continued to play a decisive role in field engagements, while cavalry and infantry coordination became more sophisticated. The reliance on contractual service and mercenary forces reflected a shift from strictly feudal military obligations to a more flexible, professionalized system, enabling rapid mobilization and sustained campaigns across multiple regions. Economic and fiscal systems were also tested during this period. Repeated campaigns required taxation, levies, and the enforcement of subsidies, often amid social unrest and demographic pressures from the post-Black Death period. Land forfeitures and redistribution altered the economic landscape, as magnates gained or lost estates based on loyalty and military success. The integration of these mechanisms into royal administration demonstrated the continuing importance of parliamentary consent, local enforcement, and bureaucratic oversight in maintaining the functionality of the English state during periods of prolonged internal conflict. The social consequences of the Wars of the Roses extended beyond the nobility. Peasantry, urban populations, and laborers were affected by requisitioned resources, increased taxation, and occasional localized violence. The movement of armies through rural and urban regions disrupted agriculture, trade, and local governance, reinforcing the interconnectedness of military activity, economic stability, and social structure. Despite these pressures, the overall demographic and social transformations initiated by the Black Death persisted. With continued mobility of laborers, the erosion of strict feudal obligations, and the adaptation of local governance structures to changing economic and social conditions. The resolution of the Wars of the Roses and the establishment of the Tudor monarchy in 1485 provided an opportunity for the restoration of political stability, centralized governance, and dynastic legitimacy. Henry VII's accession marked the consolidation of authority, the reinforcement of royal prerogative, and the integration of administrative, fiscal, and military systems to prevent the recurrence of large-scale dynastic conflict. The structural adaptations made during the preceding decades, including the professionalization of military forces, the institutionalization of parliamentary consultation, and the development of legal mechanisms for property and taxation, underpinned the durability of the Tudor state and its capacity to manage social, economic, and political challenges. The year 1485 marked a decisive turning point in the history of England, signaling the conclusion of the medieval period and the commencement of the Tudor era with the accession of Henry VII. Henry Tudor's victory at the Battle of Bosworth Field effectively ended the prolonged dynastic conflicts of the Wars of the Roses, which had dominated English politics for 4 decades. The resolution of this dynastic struggle brought about structural, institutional, and social transformations that shaped the trajectory of the English monarchy and governance, setting the foundations for early modern England. Henry VI's accession was facilitated by his lineage through the Lancastrian line, being a descendant of John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, and legitimized through marriage to Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV. This union not only unified the previously warring factions of Lancaster and York, but also established a dynastic framework aimed at consolidating royal authority and preventing the recurrence of civil war. The strategic marriage reflected both a political and symbolic resolution to the internecine conflicts that had destabilized the English monarchy since the late 15th century. Domestically, Henry VII faced the immediate challenge of securing legitimacy and consolidating authority over a kingdom that had experienced prolonged instability. The crown exercised strategic control over the nobility, employing measures such as attainder, fines, and bonds to curtail the power of magnates who might threaten central authority. These legal instruments allowed the monarchy to redistribute wealth, limit the capacity of regional magnates to raise independent armies, and ensure loyalty to the crown. The crown's capacity to enforce authority through both judicial and financial mechanisms reflected a continuation and refinement of administrative developments initiated under Edward III and maintained throughout the Plantagenet and Lancastrian periods. Parliament played a crucial role in consolidating Henry VI's authority. Sessions of Parliament were convened to confirm his legitimacy, authorize taxation, and sanction legal measures designed to stabilize the kingdom. The institutional framework that had evolved over centuries, including the representation of shires and boroughs, allowed the crown to gain consent for fiscal policies and enforce legal obligations. The integration of parliamentary processes with royal prerogative exemplified the capacity of English institutions to balance centralized authority with representative oversight, providing a framework for stable governance in the early Tudor period. Henry VI's domestic policies also focused on the restoration of economic stability. After decades of civil war, the kingdom's infrastructure, agricultural production, and trade networks required careful management and oversight. The crown sought to maintain law and order, regulate markets, and enforce property rights, contributing to the stabilization of the economy. Fiscal administration was strengthened through the use of the exchequer and the chamber system, enabling efficient collection of taxes, fines, and customs duties. The integration of financial oversight with administrative enforcement allowed Henry VII to generate resources to support government, maintain defense, and invest in the consolidation of royal authority. The conclusion of the Wars of the Roses also had significant implications for landholding and aristocratic power. The redistribution of estates from disloyal or defeated magnates to loyal supporters reduced the potential for independent military power and strengthened the crown's control over regional territories. Attainders and confiscations allowed the monarchy to both punish opposition and reinforce loyalty, creating a system of conditional landholding dependent upon adherence to royal authority. These mechanisms established long-term patterns in English governance, linking property rights, social hierarchy, and central authority. Military organization in post-medieval England also evolved as a consequence of the preceding conflicts. The crown increasingly relied upon professional forces, regional militias, and controlled recruitment rather than the feudal levy system that had dominated the medieval period. The experience of the Hundred Years' War and the Wars of the Roses demonstrated the limitations of traditional feudal military obligations and the benefits of disciplined, centrally coordinated forces. The professionalization of military service under Henry VII and his immediate successors facilitated more predictable mobilization, greater control over forces, and the integration of regional units into national strategy. The consolidation of royal authority under Henry VII extended to law and justice. The monarchy reinforced the use of courts of equity, the Star Chamber, and other royal judicial mechanisms to regulate disputes, enforce contracts, and oversee the conduct of nobility. Legal reforms established clear procedures for the adjudication of civil and criminal matters, ensuring that disputes could be addressed within a framework of centralized authority. These developments continued the evolution of English common law, which had begun under Henry II, strengthened under Edward I, and was further refined during the 14th and 15th centuries. The integration of law into governance reinforced both social order and royal legitimacy, reflecting the interdependence of legal and political structures. Socially, the end of medieval conflicts and the establishment of Tudor rule had a stabilizing effect on English society. Peasantry and urban populations, previously affected by recurrent taxation, labor demands, and military mobilization, experienced relative peace and predictability under a centralized monarchy. Changes in land tenure, labor mobility, and agricultural production initiated in the post-Black Death period continued to shape rural communities, while urban centers expanded their roles in trade, finance, and administration. The gradual reduction of feudal obligations, combined with increased oversight of property and labor, contributed to the emergence of a more structured and regulated society capable of supporting the growing demands of a centralized state. Henry VII also pursued careful diplomatic engagement to secure England's position internationally. Following decades of dynastic instability, the crown prioritized treaties, marriages, and alliances designed to prevent foreign interference and legitimize Tudor authority. Negotiations with France, Scotland, and other continental powers aimed to secure borders, maintain trade, and establish recognition of the new dynasty. These policies reflected a pragmatic approach to foreign relations, balancing the historical ambitions of English monarchs for continental influence with the practical needs of consolidating domestic authority and avoiding the overextension that had previously contributed to instability. The financial administration of Henry VII exemplified the synthesis of medieval and emerging early modern practices. The crown employed detailed audits, fiscal accounts, and oversight mechanisms to ensure the collection of revenue. Customs duties, feudal dues, and parliamentary subsidies were monitored rigorously, reflecting the necessity of financial prudence in maintaining political stability. By controlling revenue, limiting unnecessary expenditures, and enforcing compliance among nobles and officials, Henry VII strengthened the monarchy's capacity to govern effectively, reinforcing the foundations laid during the medieval period. Religious institutions continued to play a central role in governance, social cohesion, and moral authority. The church, monasteries, and parish structures provided education, social services, and mediation of disputes, complementing the administrative and judicial authority of the crown. Ecclesiastical compliance with royal policy, especially in areas of taxation and law enforcement, was essential to maintaining order and supporting the fiscal and social mechanisms underpinning Tudor consolidation. The integration of religious authority into governance reflected continuity with medieval structures while adapting to the changing needs of a centralized monarchy. Culturally and intellectually, the transition from medieval to early modern England was gradual but influenced by the consolidation of royal authority. Stability under the Tudors facilitated the growth of urban centers, the expansion of trade networks, and the development of legal and administrative literacy. Institutions such as universities, guilds, and municipal authorities increasingly played roles in shaping governance, education, and civic life. These developments, while rooted in medieval structures, anticipated the expansion of national coherence, bureaucratic sophistication, and social organization that characterized early modern England. The cumulative legacy of the medieval period, spanning 1066 to 1485, is evident in the institutional structures, social transformations, and political practices established over 4 centuries. The evolution of monarchy, the development of parliament, the codification of common law, and the integration of regional administration into a centralized framework created a durable foundation for governance. Wars, rebellions, and dynastic struggles, while disruptive, catalyzed refinements in administration, military organization, and fiscal management, resulting in a kingdom capable of sustained internal stability and external engagement. Henry VII's reign represented the formal consolidation of these developments. By resolving dynastic conflict, strengthening central authority, regulating the nobility, and enforcing law and fiscal discipline, the Tudors built upon the institutional groundwork established by the Plantagenets. The unification of formerly hostile dynastic factions through marriage and strategic alliances stabilized succession and enhanced legitimacy, ensuring that the monarchy could exercise authority with reduced reliance on coercion or baronial compliance. The monarchy's capacity to enforce loyalty and administer governance effectively represented the culmination of centuries of institutional evolution during the medieval period. The end of medieval Britain was also characterized by the adaptation of societal structures to a centralized and predictable system of governance. Labor, agriculture, trade, and urban life were increasingly regulated within legal and fiscal frameworks capable of responding to economic and social needs. Nobility and gentry operated within clearly defined obligations, property rights, and hierarchies, reinforcing the interconnection between social order and centralized authority. This structural consolidation allowed England to recover from centuries of conflict, social disruption, and economic fluctuation, providing stability that underpinned the growth of the early Tudor state. Internationally, the shift from medieval to Tudor England was marked by the prioritization of diplomacy, strategic marriages, and pragmatic alliances over extensive military campaigns on the continent. While claims to French territories persisted, the focus on domestic consolidation and international recognition represented a strategic adjustment from the ambitions of earlier Plantagenet monarchs. These measures reflected a recognition of the practical limits of military projection and the advantages of stable governance as a foundation for national power. The integration of medieval institutional, legal, and fiscal practices into Tudor governance illustrates the continuity of English political evolution. The monarchy maintained the capacity to legislate, enforce law, manage taxation, and mobilize resources while exercising authority with increasing efficiency. Administrative systems, courts, and financial mechanisms established during the Plantagenet and Lancastrian periods were adapted and refined, allowing the Tudors to maintain control over both urban and rural populations, regulate economic activity, and secure political stability across the realm. By the conclusion of 1485, England had transitioned from the feudal and dynastic instability of the medieval period to a centralized and regulated monarchy capable of asserting both domestic authority and international presence. The institutional, legal, social, and economic frameworks developed over the preceding 4 centuries provided the structural basis for the early Tudor state. Henry VII's accession, dynastic consolidation, and administrative reforms marked not only the resolution of centuries of conflict, but also the foundation for governance that would persist into the 16th century and beyond, bridging the medieval and early modern periods.